So, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our April Outdoor Florida webinar presented by the Office of Greenways and Trails. My name is Doug Alderson, and today we are featuring guest speaker Mike Cheek, who is the Recreation Project Manager with the South Florida Water Management District. He will be talking about the Kissimmee River restoration, along with the many recreation opportunities available to the public throughout the district's 16-county region. Before we get into the webinar, I have a couple of reminders for today's presentation. At the end of the slideshow, we will have a question and answer portion, so please hold all your questions until then. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be available to view on the Florida State Parks YouTube channel and our website in the future. So spread the word about that. It'll be a couple days before we can post that. I'd like to introduce our guest speaker. Mike Cheek attended the University of Florida for undergraduate studies in wildlife ecology and conservation with minors in forestry and zoology. Upon graduation, he traveled to Ecuador with the Peace Corps and worked in the Natural Resources Program doing ecotourism and mangrove restoration. He then returned to Florida to work as an environmental analyst with Palm Beach County's Department of Environmental Resources Management for 5 years, before joining the South Florida Water Management District as an environmental scientist on the Kissimmee River Restoration Project, where he worked for over 15 years. Over the past 2 years, he has worked in the Public Use and Wildlife Group as a recreation project manager in charge of reviewing current and future district engineering and restoration project plans to assure that recreational opportunities and facilities are available to the public throughout the region. So thank you again, Mike, for taking time to speak on our webinar today. I'm going to hand it over to you now, so please go ahead and share your screen and let's begin.
Okay, thanks, Doug. Appreciate the introduction. Thank you all. Okay, so thanks again, Doug, for that introduction. We'll go ahead and get started. You're seeing my screen, right, Doug?
Yes.
Okay. So again, my name is Mike Cheek. I'm a recreation project manager at the district. I've been in this position about 2.5 years, so I'm still getting to know the entire region. So I learned some new things in putting this presentation together. So it was a good exercise. So as Doug said, we're the largest water management district in Florida, span over 16 counties from Orlando all the way to the Keys, over 18,000 square miles, more than 9 million residents. We have 2,200 miles of canals. If you look at that image on the right, all those blue lines are all the canals and associated levees throughout the district that for flood control and water management throughout the system. 760 plus water control structures, 620 culverts, 89 pump stations, and over 3,500 environmental monitoring stations. So very large area. So I have public use in the districts to manage and maintain public lands for recreational use as long as they're compatible with the reason those properties were acquired. And our district particularly furthers the commitment to plan for public use on all our properties. We have more than 734,000 acres of district lands open for recreation, and that's not including right-of-ways. The group I'm in, Land Stewardship, manages about 424,000 of those acres. And then we have agencies and outside municipalities that under cooperative agreements manage 382,000 acres of that land. And our land stewardship staff, mostly dedicated to land management, prescribed burning, exotic vegetation removal, dominates the numbers there. And then there's 5 of us directly related to planning and managing public use on our properties. And we coordinate closely with all departments of the district. Obviously, there's a lot of issues with public use. They have to make sure they're compatible with the reason these properties were bought. Make sure, for example, equestrian use on a phosphorus reduction project might not be the best idea. We coordinate closely with engineering as well as water quality groups within the district, make sure that those uses are compatible. And all the specific rules of what happens on our properties is laid out in Rule 40E7. So it provides, number one, the commitment that we will allow public access and nature-based recreation on district lands that's consistent with state statutes and district policy. We manage over 135 properties open to the public, 70 parking trailheads for public access. We have 52 designated camping areas, including 2 more developed RV equestrian sites, over 330 miles of trails, again, not including the right of ways, which are associated with those canals and levees, which are also open to the public, and multiple boat ramp facilities. And it's available for a variety of nature-based recreation activities, depending on the type of land. So I'll just go briefly through those types, which include conservation lands, project lands, interim lands, and then rights of way. So conservation lands are typical what you associate with wildlife management areas. They have the widest amount of use: hunting, fishing, bird watching, hiking trails, primitive camping, equestrian use, cycling, canoeing, kayaking. So open 24 hours, 356 days a year, open all the time. There's not a lot of restrictions except for hunting regulations. And this is some of our properties managed with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. And access facilities at these sites can range from just simple parking areas at gates to more sophisticated parking lots, and informational kiosks at the entrances, bathrooms, etc. And again, we allow camping. This is a shot on the bottom right of the equestrian barn at the Hickory Hammock Equestrian Center. And conservation lands, again, include a variety of access points, airboat ramps. Even in remote areas, we do have some facilities there. All right, looks like it's kind of taken off on me. I think it's at its own speed. It's going through the slides here. If I can slow it down. So that's in contrast to project lands or constructed wetlands. For example, we have stormwater treatment areas. These have very specific goals. So in this case, the STAs are commonly phosphorus reduction water bodies inside of impoundments. They're usually managed about 1.5 feet deep. They have a very specific goal of reducing phosphorus before that water is sent into the Everglades for discharge. So we have more restricted use there, usually based on weekend access only, Friday, Saturdays, and Sundays. But again, we do put in structures that allow the public to come in. Oftentimes on the old construction areas where they used to stage equipment and things, we'll use that space to put in recreation features. This is just an example engineering drawing of some of the parking access facilities we put in at these project lands. There's parking, even boat ramp parking, a boat ramp, observation boardwalk, and informational kiosks. And then we'll have some of those shelters out within the different cells of the STAs. And you might have heard of these areas. They're mostly on the east coast of South Florida, and they're very popular with limited entry quota hunts for alligators and waterfowl in particular. And we also issue authorized bird watching tours within these areas. They're really popular, high densities, a wide variety of bird life for observing. Sometimes flamingos show up, and changes obviously the level of interest out there. And we work within our group, we have a wildlife biologist also that tracks endangered species nesting on the levees, which often happens. And inside these cells, again, they're very highly productive cells. So things like snail kites will start to pop up and nest in these areas. And we'll have to respond by closing gates and giving these nest buffers from the public, and close the site down potentially, or put out signage restricting access to some of these properties. And then moving on to vacant undesignated lands. These are projects that have been planned for future wetland construction projects. So it hasn't happened yet. They haven't come online because there's a lot of engineering and hydrological monitoring that go in to these projects. So they may not come online for another 10 years. In the meantime, we do open them to the public from dawn to dusk. A little more passive recreation, hiking, horseback riding, fishing, and bicycling. Usually no hunting or motor vehicles or camping on these properties. And we'll just do something simple like put in an equestrian pass-through gate there at the bottom where horses and hikers can walk through, but ATVs and things that are more destructive can't get through there. And as I mentioned before, all those blue lines on the map of the district are district right-of-ways associated with the canals and levees system that helps manage the water throughout South Florida. And these are generally open to the public for things like hiking, biking, and in some cases, equestrian riding. Some of the Florida Trail runs along these levee systems. And of course, we have partnerships with NGOs that help us manage these properties. A lot of the wildlife management areas are managed in conjunction with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. They coordinate and manage public use, including hunting, rulemaking, and habitat and wildlife management on the properties, as well as providing law enforcement. So we work very closely with them on developing the rules of what's allowable out there. We have 10 wildlife management areas that are managed with FWC, including 8 public small game hunting areas that the STAs are classified as. And we also have specialty hunt area on these properties, such as youth hunts, wounded warrior hunts, very successful and well-received events. Last year on the STAs, we had almost 7,000 hunter days. So a lot of folks going out there. This is just an example of working with Lee County. They have incredible environmental center and public outreach program, getting people out, folks into the Everglades, where we don't have the capability at the district to do this environmental outreach. These partnerships are vital to getting people exposed to the Everglades and what these ecosystems mean to the South Florida environment. So we're very thankful for these relationships. Again, Audubon Society, they typically lead the tours on some of these STAs. And currently we have 3 different groups. We started our first Audubon tour back in 2005 on STA 5. And now we're working with 3 different chapters here in South Florida. So if you want to hook up with them, it's Hendry Glades County Audubon, Palm Beach County Audubon, and Martin County Audubon. We've led over 100 tours out there with those groups with 3,500 plus people. Again, the birding out there can be spectacular. So it's quite a sight, very productive properties. And again, this is the unintended consequence of building these shallow impoundments. It's just a huge attraction to wildlife. The Florida Trail Association, obviously without them, we couldn't maintain a lot of our trail system where the Florida Trail passes over district properties. They maintain the trails, maintain signage. The Ocean to Lake Spur Trail that goes from Lake Okeechobee to Hope Sound is very popular. They do a really great job of keeping that up, as well as the main route of the Florida Trail. Again, the Crew Trust is big on environmental education. That was down near Naples, that environmental center I showed you. And Florida Atlantic University also has a Center for Environmental Studies up on the Kissimmee River. And they bring folks out on pontoon tours to see the river restoration firsthand, exposes elementary, middle school, and high school kids, and even international groups to what that restoration project's all about. And of course, this is a familiar site on a lot of our properties. I mean, we love to see the use, but we hate to see these sites getting trashed with garbage and things. So we work with the municipalities to get garbage pickup and things we can't do ourselves as the district, providing garbage cans, picking up regular service in some of these more remote areas. And we also use contractors to maintain bathrooms and some of these facilities that are in remote areas, difficult to get to, that can't just be maintained easily. So we're thankful for our volunteer program and people that work at all these different sites throughout the district. We had over almost 15,000 volunteer hours last year logged for a value of almost $500,000. We have campsite hosts at several of the more advanced campsites. You can see the picture there. People, kind of a win-win situation for people that want to spend their winter in South Florida. They can become a campground host while providing assistance on the properties with campers, which is our busy season and dry season. Cleaning off kiosks. That's the paddling trail group in the upper right, establishing new campsites on the river. A lot of sportsmen's groups are highly involved with our district properties. Florida Sportsmen's Conservation Association, Lake Okeechobee Airboaters Association. Here they're putting in signage for us, a picnic area. Again, this is just highlighting this one particular project that happened recently on the Kissimmee River, establishing campsites at equidistant portions along the river that allowed Doug Alderson and the Florida Paddling Trail Association to do a extensive paddling trip along the entire length of the Kissimmee River. So again, thankful for the volunteers that established these primitive campsites. We've got really just a picnic bench and a fire ring. These are boat-in only sites. We put in one at Chandler Slough and Seaboard Marsh South. And we're also currently in the process of making the Kissimmee River a designated Blue Way paddling trail. So that should be coming online very quickly this summer. Just indicating that you can traverse the river in kayak or canoe with these campsites available to make a nice mega transect, you could call it, along the river, and then camp at equidistant areas, maybe 10 to 15 miles between each campsite. So ideal for paddlers. So again, great coming together of two kind of unrelated groups. We have the Florida Sportsman's Conservation Association, typically associated with airboats, and then the paddling trail group that came together for these campsites because they both have a mutual interest in camping on the river. This is some shot. That's Doug Alderson there, actually pulling on the cord there to get to one of the locks on the Kissimmee River. Pretty impressive crew of paddlers. They did this entire route in 6 days, paddle along the Kissimmee over 6 different days. So again, thanks to the volunteers that allowed that to happen. They had a pretty good experience from what I understand. I joined them for a little bit in paddle as well. So that was quite an accomplishment, quite an adventure. We provide informational kiosks at a lot of the trailheads, informational guides. Our website is being upgraded. It's a little primitive. We're not kind of a little bit behind the times, but on that website, you can find the special use licenses, and those are where you get your camping registration, and they're free. The special use licenses are free, but you do need to register with the username, password, email. And last year there was over almost a million or half a million registered special use license users in the system, and we issued over 10,000 SULs for camping. And after COVID, a lot of our campsites became very popular. So it's kind of a hidden secret that there's free camping in South Florida in the winter. So again, we issue special event authorizations for things like night sky watches, equestrian events, as long as they're compatible with the uses of the lands. And the South Florida Water Management District is very good about interacting with different user groups, stakeholders. We have a quarterly recreation forum, and it's been going on for many years now. It's basically a chance for the public to see what our future plans and projects are, and then we get input from them on kind of that local knowledge of the landscape and what might be or not be an issue there for public use. So we get great feedback from fishermen, hunters, hikers, bikers, all kinds of organized groups that come to these meetings. You guys are welcome to come and join them if you're in this South Florida district area. They can be very interesting, very passionate folks that live and die by being able to access these properties. And then, of course, we evaluate future project lands. You might have heard in the news a lot of Governor DeSantis announcements that Everglades restoration projects are moving forward. New ones are coming online all the time, so we're expanding those. And that's one of my jobs at the district, is looking for new opportunities on these engineered constructed wetlands for public use and recreation. So we have just some massive reservoirs and flow equalization basins coming online in the next 10 to 20 years. It's pretty amazing right now. Opportunities like on the Kissimmee River, once construction is complete, we can look for more passive recreation opportunities like Overlook. And I'll just go through some slides of some of the more popular sites and some of the recreation features. Just last year, we put in an airboat launch off of the Tamiami Trail down by the S356 pump station. This is just west of Miami. So a popular way to access the Everglades Water Conservation Area 3B. This is meant to replace an old ramp that's going out with the renovation of the S356 pump station. A lot of people were happy about seeing this new access point. Let's see. Again, the Istapoa Canal Recreation Area in Highlands County, initially built by the Corps, but now maintained by us. That gives you access to the Kissimmee River. This is a shot from STA-1 in Palm Beach County parking lot when it was first installed. STA-1 East, the boardwalk, informational kiosk. Again, popular with bird watchers and hunters, these areas. There's a nice boat ramp facility out by Water Conservation Area 3A. You can see the pedestrian crossover, really nice boat ramp accessing the Everglades. And we try to keep things compatible, ADA accessible for all types of people. So we have mobility impaired access. This is a hunting blind in STA-5 that was created for disabled hunters specifically. We have pavilions that are put out by volunteers with boat access only, bringing concrete, wood, all these materials out to remote portions of the Kissimmee chain of lakes. So impressive group of volunteers there. That's the Kissimmee River Valley Sportsmen's Association. Very thankful to the work they've done up there. Bird Rookery Swamp in Collier County, one of our most visited properties due to its proximity to Naples. A lot of bird watching. Orchids are all around the boardwalk there. This is Alapata Flats in Martin County, popular hunting and camping area. This is down in Miami-Dade, big water management project where we're going to expand hunting in the Rocky Glades public small game hunting area. So adding over 5,000 acres of new public hunting area because we want to keep the rules consistent for things like python removals, waterfowl hunters, bringing this property up to almost 10,000 acres. And this borders between the urban development of Homestead with Everglades National Park because it's kind of an important buffer there. And things will be allowed there that you can't do in, for example, Everglades National Park. So it's more user friendly for some folks. This is Okeechobee, very popular STA, a small STA just north of the town of Okeechobee. A lot of people go there for lunch breaks, hiking, biking on the levees, go take a quick jog during your lunch break. It's a very popular site, easily accessible. So some of those pictures I showed you of the infrastructure we have here at the district, a lot of it was put in 10 plus years ago. And so now it's starting to become dilapidated. So that's one of our new big pushes here at the district is to replace some of these things, bathrooms, boat ramps, shelters, parking lots, informational kiosks. This is a shot of a restroom on the left there at Hickory Hammock Equestrian Center. And this was destroyed during Hurricane Ian, I believe it was, several years back. And we secured funds from FEMA to install these really nice concrete, precast concrete vault bathrooms. They can be installed just in one day. They bring it in one single unit. Pretty amazing to watch. Over 50,000 pound structure just dropped onto these two vaults in a remote area with no plumbing or anything. And so we're going to try to replace some of the more heavily used bathroom sites with these concrete bathrooms in the near future here. Replacing some of the boardwalks that are again dilapidating. Everything was, great for a while, but we haven't been dedicating a lot of time to refurbishing and restoring some of those facilities that went up years ago. And there's another thing I work on specifically is trying to get this interactive GIS web map up online available to folks. And this will be really nice. You'll be able to zoom in and out throughout the water management district, zoom in on campsites, click on a campsite. There'll be photos of what it looks like, all the amenities available there, and then a link to the SUL site where you can reserve that campsite. So that's soon to be released. It's a pretty big effort with all of our property and facilities we have. So again, we're behind the times, but we're trying to bring that up to speed here. Hopefully over the summer before the next camping season, this will come online. So it'll be a great welcome to folks. Because we get a lot of calls from the public wondering where these campsites are, how do you get there, and all that will be on this interactive map. Okay, so Doug, yeah, that's all the public use stuff I had. And then since I'm very familiar with the Kissimmee River restoration project, we'll focus more specifically on that, just to give you some of the ecological responses that have occurred out there. And I already talked about some of the recreation available out there with paddling opportunities. This is a shot of the S69 weir, which is I don't know, it's the largest weir I've seen in South Florida, and it's the southern terminus of the river restoration project. This is where the floodplain waters flow back into the main C38 canal. You're looking south here, and then that C38 canal moves on down to Lake Okeechobee. After this, in this picture, the weir is not overflowing with water; it's just barely overflowing. But at higher discharges, the water will overtop that weir and move south. It's just the very end of the backfill where the C38 canal was filled. So just briefly, the river is channelized between 62 and 71. On the left is an old historic photo where the river meandered for over 100 miles between Lake Kissimmee and Lake Okeechobee. And that floodplain pulse was very important to the ecology of the system. So the river would be in its banks, like during the dry season, if you see in that photo on the left. This is a shot from the 50s. And then there was a flood pulse that would raise the water in the wet season, inundate the entire 1 to 2 mile wide floodplain for most of the wet season. Then you have a slow recession in the dry season, concentrating wading bird prey, small fish, aquatic invertebrates, and they would cue in their nesting on those dry down events. But all that was lost when it was channelized in the 60s. And on the picture on the right, you can see it was impounded by water control structures, 5 of them along the route. And you had the C-38 canal. Um, this is a shot of it north of the restoration area now. It's 30-foot deep, 300-foot wide drainage canal, highly effective at keeping the floodplain dry. And it would beeline water south during flood events from Lake Kissimmee to Lake Okeechobee. So thereby bypassing all these huge expanses of natural marsh. And that's when people begin to kind of realize what the ecological damage had been as the birds disappeared. So this is a cool shot I have that I like to show just to kind of demonstrate the one of the most immediate and obvious ecological responses we saw with backfilling. On the left there, in the background, you see the C-38 canal, not backfilled. And in between those white lines, there's the backfilled C-38 canal that was done in 2001. And this was during one of my overflights doing the wading bird and waterfowl foraging surveys. There's this massive flock of over 1,000 wading birds, things like great egrets, great blue herons, snowy egrets, little blue herons, tricolored herons. And they're literally foraging on what was formerly a 30-foot deep channel that had very little life in it available to these wading birds. So it took very little time for that shallow marsh habitat to come back and really attract wildlife. So the restoration numbers came up immediately. Um, and so just to point out that the construction itself, the backfilling of the river is now complete. It's a 50-50 cost share with the Army Corps of Engineers. They did the engineering and planning and the construction itself. And my district is in charge of land acquisition and then restoring or evaluating the success of the restoration by monitoring 25 restoration metrics. So we've already backfilled 22 miles of canal, reconnected 40 miles of river channel, and removed 2 water control structures. So now what's left is to mimic the historic inflows out of the upper basin that you see on the right there, the Kissimmee, Cypress, and Hatchnahall lakes. They feed the river. So now we need to mimic the historic inflows with how we operate the gate, the entry gate at S65 at the north end of the river. And then there's the restoration evaluation program that will go from 2028 all the way through 2033, evaluating these ecological metrics. This is just an image showing those 3 headwater lakes, Kissimmee at the bottom, Hatchnahall in the upper left, and Cypress at the top. And this is the source of water for the river besides rainfall. And now with land acquisition and a change in water management, we'll be able to raise the stage during the wet season from a peak of 52.5 feet above sea level to 54 now. That's adding over 100,000 acre feet of additional storage. This shot just shows the anatomy of a backfill. It's pretty straightforward, but not at a large scale with the amount of equipment that went into this. But anyway, on the left side, you see the C-38 canal spoil being pushed in to the C-38 canal. And then once that's blocked off, water is then shunted back into the main historic Kissimmee River main channel on the left side there. And on the bottom right, you see it says C-38 canal spoil. That's spoil that has not been yet backfilled in the river in this photo, but that's since been completed. And this is just a shot of the S65 sea lock, which was subsequently removed. Kind of a neat shot of the backfill as they closed in on that C-38 canal, and that structure was eventually demolished and buried under like 3 feet of backfill. So the completion of the construction was celebrated back in 2021 with dignitaries, government officials, and things from the Corps all the way up to folks from Washington, D.C. came in to celebrate this historic event over 22 years of construction to get this to this point. So we've now partially restored 25,000 acres of wetlands. And again, those 25 metrics I mentioned, they're comprised of hydrology, geomorphology, dissolved oxygen, the plant communities out there, invertebrate communities, reptile amphibians are tracked, as well as fish and birds, which is where I came into the picture. And just briefly, just to look at the restoration expectations and what we've seen so far with wading birds, the expectation was to see over 30 birds per square kilometer. after the restoration. This is based on historical information of what we knew was out there historically. And this is just a graphic of what's happened since the backfill. You can see on the left there, those bars indicating the initial very dramatic response, over 70 to 80 birds per square kilometer. And since then, we've had a more stable, steady state as you move off to the right, but significantly greater than the 30 birds per square kilometer goal that was our target. And the waterfowl goal, which is very specific to be greater than 4 birds per square kilometer. And we expected 9 species to return that had disappeared from the system with a richness level of at least 13 species. And following restoration immediately, and after 2001 backfilling, we did see, again, a big pulse in waterfowl use, and then kind of a somewhat of a decline. And we've been significantly over that expectation, though, 4 birds per square kilometer almost every year since backfilling. And again, this is only with partial restoration, just the physical reconstruction of the form of the river. We did see these species returning: fulvous whistling duck, pintail, shoveler. There's more diversity out there, although we're not quite seeing the species richness on a regular basis. It's more just like a single pintail here, a single widgeon there. Most of the flocks are still dominated by blue-winged teal and mottled ducks. This is a shot from a flock on the river, pretty amazing flock of blue-winged teal there. So again, it's just to reiterate the point that the physical form of the river has been reconstructed, but we still need to manage that headwater inflow. And so that these areas, these parameters in yellow, still need that inflow to change their responses to restoration. So things like the bass populations, dissolved oxygen, the hydrology, some of the vegetation is not getting to where we want yet due to the lack of longer inundation periods. And that flood pulse cycle just shown here is in the upper left there. That'd be a typical wet season view of the floodplain, 2 miles wide, just this massive sheet flowing water moving down towards Lake Okeechobee. And in the dry season on the upper right, you get kind of a slow drawdown of water levels as the dry season progresses. And then you see these drying pools concentrating prey, stimulating wading birds to reproduce, attracting waterfowl. And then by the end of the dry season, water's almost just within its channels right before the next wet season pulse. And that moves nutrients in and out of the floodplain, keeps productivity high. And this graphic just shows, just to give you an idea, the across the bottom is months of the year: January, February, dry season levels. The reference period target is the blue line. That's where we want water levels to be on the floodplain. But as you can see, since backfilling, we've still been very dry during the dry season, not even a half a foot of water depths, whereas normally it would be over a foot almost all year long. The depths peak now a little early in September versus what it did historically in early November. And our recession rates are much quicker than they used to be. So we come down very quickly after that initial flood pulse in the wet season, instead of a slower recession throughout the dry season. And this is what our target vegetation is looking like, kind of this hemi-marsh, open, 50% open water, 50% vegetation. But we're seeing not quite that much openness yet due to the lack of inundation. And just a little project update on the ground. If anyone's on the Kissimmee River, the Army Corps of Engineers will be installing this navigation signage in areas where we installed riprap or just limestone rocks at some of the bends in the river where we're having erosion problems. So you might see a barge on the water installing these large scale signs just so people don't run into them when the water's high. So yeah, that's all I've got, Doug. I think we still have a little bit of time for questions if anyone has anything. Yeah, and I apologize for not having the screen set up properly there.
Oh, that was great. And and just to reiterate, that was a wonderful, we did this trip in late January for 6 days kayaking the river, and just to see it firsthand with all the wildlife, that was spectacular. So, and thank you for giving us some of the background on that. And so we're going to open it up for some questions. So put your questions in the chat. And I'm going to start out with a couple questions. You mentioned a lot of volunteer opportunities that people have. So how would people get involved with helping being a campground host or a trail volunteer or whatever? What's the
Well,
best way?
the best way is to go on the website and sfwmd.gov, and there's a recreation page, and there's a volunteer section there. You can click on that, and sometimes, I mean, the best way to do it is really you want to work on a property probably local to you. So, sometimes folks want to do something, but then if they don't know the area well, they're not sure exactly how to do it. We don't have necessarily a volunteer coordinator, so we kind of depend on the people that come with the idea of what they're looking to do specifically, unless they hook up with a group that already works with us. But we do have that web page under recreation on the site, but I would encourage folks to kind of, if anyone lives within the district, to look at the properties that are adjacent to their home where they can actually spend more time and get to know it, or hook up with a local NGO that might be working in that area, and they can contact me directly to hook up with a specific site or learn more about it. Because until we get that website interactive map going,
Mhm.
it's a little difficult for folks to figure out where these properties are if they've never been on district lands.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So we have a couple questions. Is an STA the same as a wetland? So
Oh,
they have
well,
those in the Treasure Coast. They're in the Treasure Coast area, and they want to know a couple things about that for birds and wildlife. What is a slough?
okay. Yeah. Well, the STAs, the stormwater treatment areas that we've been constructing here within the district, they function as an artificial man-made wetland, you could say, but they're highly manipulated, so they don't have necessarily the seasonal fluctuations of high and low water. We typically want to maintain them right around 1.5 feet deep throughout the year, just because the goal is very specific for nutrient reduction. So the short answer is yes, they function as wetlands, but the long answer is that no, they don't function as natural occurring wetlands in Florida, because they don't get that typical dry down in the end of a
Mhm.
dry season. A lot of marshes in Florida are ephemeral, so they dry out completely and then have large fluctuations in water levels, which the STAs don't typically get unless we do it on purpose. We can control them with water levels for management purposes if we go in and do like a muck scraping or something. But because of that stability, they're also highly attractive to wildlife. So that stable water level is always there, available.
Mhm.
So when the adjacent marshes dry out, I mean, you get the gators are just unbelievable sometimes, the numbers you see, and the wading birds in the dry season, yeah, it can be unbelievable compared to the natural systems. That yeah.
Okay, and what is a slough? That's another question here.
Oh, slough. That's just a natural uh, wetland that has a kind of a linear feature to it that flows in one direction. So it can have trees in it, which is typically a swamp, I guess you would say. But the sloughs that are referred to in the Everglades are the deeper areas that have flow more times of the year, or more percentage of time of the year, and they have a little less vegetation, so it's more open water and
Mhm.
submerged aquatic vegetation that comes up from the bottom. And whereas the wet prairies are a little shallower marsh. So yeah, the sloughs kind of deep water linear features in Florida.
Okay. Is the district or FWC expanding or building new refuge as part of the Pelican Island? As part of Pelican Island. So is that
Uh,
being expanded, the Pelican Island Refuge? I think that was the question.
okay. Yeah, I believe that's managed by the
That's a federal.
National Park Service. Yes, as a federal property, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So I don't have any input on that. So yeah, we don't have any
Okay.
relationship with them directly since they manage that property. Yeah.
Okay. What was the overall purpose of the Kissimmee restoration project? Water flow, population, algae, uh, kind of like the primary purpose, I guess.
Yeah,
Is
no,
that
that's
the
a great
question?
question. Well, to be honest, it didn't have a lot of the specific goals that a lot of the new projects have currently, but the goal was unique in that it was just specific to ecological integrity. So essentially restoring the system back to the way it was to the extent possible. So yeah, because of the ecological damage that people noticed immediately following the channelization, which was things like loss of wading birds, loss of listed species like bald eagles,
Mhm.
loss of waterfowl populations, the goal was just general ecological integrity. So it doesn't have a lot of the more specific restoration goals that some of our new projects have, like a specific phosphorus load or a specific algae reduction goal. But because of its goal of restoring ecological integrity, you have a lot of these side benefits. Obviously, it does help reduce algae outbreaks in Lake Okeechobee, for example, by filtration and storing of more water upstream of Lake Okeechobee, for example. So ideally, yeah, the vegetation on that floodplain, now that it's getting inundated, it's absorbing nutrients, it's slowing down flow and effluence into Lake Okeechobee. So in effect, it's meeting some of those newer restoration targets that we have on bigger, newer projects.
And I read where that was the biggest restoration project of its kind for rivers in the world. Is that your estimation? Is there anything else that compares to the Kissimmee restoration?
No, I mean, to be honest, yeah, I haven't seen anything that is that scale, that length of river that was restored like that. I've seen smaller projects throughout the world. There might be some planned projects in other countries that are possibly reaching the scale of this, but as far as I know, it's still touted as the largest river restoration project in the world, and especially just for the purposes of ecological integrity. It's yeah, it's kind of unprecedented. You know, if it were to happen now, it'd be, you know, a harder sell to just say we want to just restore it back to how it used to look. That's people need more, you know, rationale and you know, dollar values to what these ecological values are.
Okay. Does the district intend to employ a district-wide volunteer coordinator in the future? And how are volunteers managed without one?
Excellent question. The short answer is yes. We hope to get several new positions. We have requests in for new positions on board for exactly that type of activity. Someone that would be able to have more direct input into volunteer coordination. And that, again, that's why I was emphasizing just how valuable these municipalities and non-governmental organizations are with organizing, because just one or two people dedicated to that would make a huge difference in, you know, coming up with project ideas and facilitating the connection there. So yeah, great question. And yeah, short answer is yes, we're requesting new positions for that. And what there was a second part of that question, Doug, or did I miss?
The second part was how are they currently managed? And there was a follow-up question: is there a current contact person for campground host? So basically, how are volunteers managed now without a volunteer coordinator? So
Yeah, yeah. Well, we have direct hands-on with the camp host since that's a more specific job. So James Harbaugh here at the district is the contact for the campground host. Yeah, again, you can contact me and I can put you into contact with James. But yeah, and we have 3 sites that have campground hosts, and
okay.
yeah, it's been yeah.
Do you mind typing in your contact information, your email, I guess, in the chat? Are you able to do that, or just give it?
Sure. Yeah, I can put it up.
So while he's doing that, I just want to remind you the next webinar, we have confirmation that next month's webinar is going to be with Mickey Thomason of the Cross Florida Greenway. That is on Wednesday, May 8th. And Mickey is worked with the Greenway pretty much since it began when the barge canal was deauthorized. And so he has a lot of information. He's going to talk about recreation opportunities, the history of the Greenway, and reflect on his long career. So mark your calendars for that one as well. And I just posted some information yesterday on the website for that.
Okay. Yeah, I posted my email there.
Okay, very good. So if you want to get hold of Mike M. Cheek at South Florida Water Management District.gov, and he can, if he needs to, he can refer you to another person in the district about volunteers and other things. So thank you. And Just one more question, if I don't see any more in the chat. What advice would you give to another group or agency who wants to embark on an environmental restoration project, since this is such a big one?
Well, I think yeah, that could be learned from what we've done on the river. There's a lot of input into having the restoration targets from the beginning, so that yeah, a lot of the evaluation of success is knowing what it used to look like and what your goals are. So having clear goals of what the purpose of that restoration is, because a lot of times, it's not realistic to be able to put something back to the way it was before. So you have to look at really what the current goal is, what's the property being used for currently. But there is a lot of money available for these types of projects, especially if it's can show an economical benefit to that particular area or that property, in addition to the ecological, benefit. So, yeah.
Very good. Well, if there are no more questions, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. And I thank you very much, Mike, for joining us. Very enlightening. And I think it'll generate a lot of interest in the district and as well as the Kissimmee River restoration. And I encourage folks to keep track of the Kissimmee Restoration Project as far as if you want to kayak or boat on the river. Information's available on district website as well as the website of the Florida Paddling Trails Association, and then later on the DEP Office of Greenways and Trails website. So anyhow, lots of things happening. And so thank you very much, and everybody have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all for your
All right.
time.
We'll post this in a couple days. Thank you. Recording. So check our website.